I call to order the Plan Commission meeting of May 28, 2019. We'll proceed with roll call.
Ms. Lazaris?
Here,
Meg-
pardon me.
Mr. Magnuson?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Mr. Schumacher?
Here.
Mr. Coots?
Here.
Mr. Homan is absent.
Item number 3, correction and/or approval of the minutes of April 23, 2019. Are there any comments about the minutes?
Move for approval of the minutes of April 23rd.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of April 23rd. Any comments? Okay. In that case, we'll proceed with roll call vote.
Mr. Magnuson?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Schumacher?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazaris?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-0.
Next we have questions and public comment. And here, the public may address the commission at this time regarding items on the agenda unless the item is the subject of a public hearing. If your comments pertain to a public hearing, then you would hold your comments. But tonight, we don't have a public hearing. We do have a discussion and recommendation on Sandy Beach redevelopment concept and launch boat design option 2A. And if anyone is here to listen to that and you find after the presentation that you wish to comment, then we'll address that at that time. Is there anyone who wishes to comment on something else at this time? All right, in that case, we will go to item number 5, discussion and recommendation on Sandy Beach redevelopment concept and boat launch design option 2A. And I'll call on Mr. Wolf, our planning consultant, to present the proposal. And then Mr. Wilkie, if you want to say anything as well, then good. But we'll hear from staff on this proposal now.
Okay. Well, thank you. Just making sure I can be heard. This is our 6th presentation on this study.
Sixth in the last 2 months.
In the last 2 months.
Couple more
We did,
before that.
yes, and I have a little timeline here. Obviously, this is the Sandy Beach Park, Sandy Beach Road, and the mobile home community down there. This slide, while I know a little challenging to read, this is available online. The entire presentation is available online, so anyone can pull it down and look at it themselves. In a nutshell, this is kind of the timeline of where we started. We started back in late 2015. Really, and I'll get into the details on that, but we didn't start looking at Sandy Beach as an entirety initially. We were really looking at the mobile home community because there are issues with the infrastructure there. But through that, council feedback on it, staff feedback on it, it grew to being a full redevelopment study for the Sandy Beach Park area. It included evaluation of lodging opportunities down there, and it included evaluation of event space with a restaurant facility as well. The lodging has been removed from consideration by the council, but the restaurant replacement and event space still remains. But in a nutshell, in January 2018, a presentation was made to the council on the early findings. There were follow-up presentations, discussions later in 2018, and the plan was more or less blessed by the council. And then we started moving into implementation of the plan, which is what you're identifying as alternative 2A is the boat launch. The first piece of implementation is relocating the boat launch so that in order for the city to submit for grant funding, it has to have a certain amount of engineering done on the boat launch to be submitted, and they have to have permits obtained for the boat launch prior to a decision on the grant application. So the grant will get submitted in June, and a decision will be made in the next few months following that as to what gets funded statewide from that grant program. And then to be eligible, you have to have permits. So that's kind of why we are where we are to date. There were 2 PIMs on the boat launch itself, and there were some revisions, which is why it's 2A on the determined layout of the boat launch facility. That's this graphic here. I'm sorry, it's a little difficult to see on the screen. Again, I encourage people to download this exact presentation from the city's website. But this has been witnessed in a number of different PIMs, so I wasn't going to spend too much time on it. We're going to talk bigger picture about the redevelopment study itself and the layout and kind of why the council approved the study as it did. So just to orient some people, boy, it really is difficult to see. I don't know how to make it any bigger. On the east end of the study area is the manufactured home community. That is immediately west of Rotary Park. That transitions the large area in the center is the general parking area with a stormwater management pond. Well, it doesn't function as a stormwater management pond. It really is just a green area. Anybody who's been out there in the rain understands it doesn't really function as a stormwater management pond. Another reason for doing the study. In the center is the restaurant, and then the existing boat launch is here with the other facilities. So just a very quick orientation. The manufactured home community consists of not quite 100. Rob gets confirmed that it's just under 100 operating sites out there from May through October. As I said, this started by looking at the mobile home park mobile home community, before we looked at the rest of the park site. The issue that we're dealing with out there is all of the infrastructure is failing. You know, we're highlighting some of the key issues here, but there are 3/4-inch water mains serving the mobile home community, which is pretty substandard. There are collapsing sanitary sewers, failing asphalt. The roadways out there are very narrow. When the city when it wanted to buy Sandy Beach Park, it had to take over the mobile home community as well, decades and decades ago. It wasn't constructed to any sort of contemporary standard, even for the time. It was seasonal housing. The roadways are very narrow. They are not constructed to any subsurface standard that we would require, or any width that we would require today. So there isn't a lot of parking out there for the users themselves. So people park up and down the roadways. As I said, is very narrow. When there is an emergency issue, we do have problems with that. There is poor site drainage on site. There is, we say inadequate. There's no stormwater management for that area. And then there is a pump station that's very antiquated that needs to be replaced.
Lift station. Sanitary sewer lift station.
So what happened was, as we started looking at the issues with the mobile home community, it became readily apparent that if you're going to start improving the infrastructure there, you have to improve the infrastructure within the park, because all of the utilities are connected. You have to do all the underground work at one time. The lift station is over on the park site itself. You couldn't necessarily do one without doing the other. We have a lot of safety issues out there within the park itself, without even looking at some of the safety issues with the manufactured home community. There are considerable conflicts within the park between competing activities. You have the launching of boats in the center of the entire park, and that boat launch splits the beachfront and the recreational areas, the restaurant from some of the picnic areas. The restrooms are on one side, another portion of the beach on the other, and again, the activity that goes on when people are launching boats. Anecdotally, from the park staff who man the facilities out there are a lot of near misses. Boaters are focused on launching their boats, and the other boaters that are pulling in or putting in or pulling out of the facility Children are children, and they don't always recognize where there's a safety issue. It is difficult for people to see children, other patrons, kind of going across the tarmac where the boat launching activities are going on. We need improved community emergency access. I think you can see that's an issue as you have roadways under construction. There's no, aside from 89, there's no continuous route from Sandy Beach all the way north, west of 89. So the need to connect ferry through is important. There are few, if not no, pedestrian facilities in that area. And then there is no shelter for public safety. Well, there's a very small shelter for public safety. Does not meet the required standards for the manufactured home community. So we need to make those improvements. We have heard for years from residents and patrons alike that there are significant parking issues. The city regularly contends with people parking up and down Sandy Beach Road however they like. The violation forfeiture is pretty low, so they just take it as the price of having close parking in front of people's homes. You can see where that leads to some problems. We have aging recreational structures. The restaurant itself was condemned at one point. The city made some improvements so it could be habitable, but it's at the end of its life. There are insufficient public restrooms out there, and they're pretty antiquated. We have park admission conflicts. I'll talk about those in a little bit. Obviously, there are a lot of water quality concerns because the park wasn't designed to really handle stormwater management as we would require it today. So quantity or quality issues, pre-treatment before releasing back into the watershed, those improvements aren't out there at this time. At the end of the day, it's time to reinvest. So what we're showing here is a revised concept based on some of the feedback that we received from the PIMs with the boat launches and the feedback from the council to remove certain elements, specifically the housing, lodging component to it. The focus here, and we'll have more detailed graphics, if you can see here, is to have a single unified beach for recreation activities and moving the recreational activities to an area where they're highly visible when you're inside the park. To not have them scattered kind of throughout the site to ensure that, as I said, many eyes on each other and to remove conflicts with vehicles. The restaurant is still illustrated as the center, but we'll get into some more of the details there. We have added on to the parking facilities considerably and improved stormwater management. And again, we have a number of graphics to illustrate that. So this is the existing kind of drop-off park entrance and boat launch area. You can see that it's a large tarmac area, beach on the left, beach on the right, vehicular activity in the heart of the park. The goal there is to remove that. In the short run, the launch would stay while the new one's being constructed, and there's discussions of maybe maintaining part of the launch, not for vehicle access, but for someone to carry or portage canoes or kayaks down to the water's edge. But as you can see here, we'd have a large green. There would be a very large drop-off area at the edge of the parking lot. No one going into the park with a vehicle. Very clear pedestrian spaces. Extensive visibility to the water from the parking lot. Extensive visibility just across this green to ensure that it feels accessible, that it is convenient for pickup and drop-off of passengers, but we are removing conflict points, especially in modes for where we can. It's just kind of a different angle. This is showing a patio area with associated restaurant, but again, this element, there's a pier. We'll talk about that in a little more detail, but again, a unifying feature. You can see good visibility throughout the entry area of the park. Extensive improvements to the parking facilities. The proposed parking facility is in the same location as the existing parking facility. It is reconfigured a little bit to square it up, but it adds, it almost doubles the number of parking stalls. One of the comments we heard from the Parks Board itself was maybe a few more islands, et cetera, in there to green up the parking lot a bit, which we don't disagree with. When we were tasked by the council, they wanted to see how many parking stalls can you get into an area that meets design standards, functions properly, and then we can kind of tweak from there. So we go. Sorry.
We also tried to get part of the proposal is no parking on Sandy Beach Road.
Yes.
So if there's no parking on Sandy Beach Road, you need to get make parking available for all those cars in the parking lot.
So we go from about 127 parking stalls. What's being illustrated here is 280. It would reduce from there if you added a few more landscape islands, et cetera. And those landscape islands could include infiltration, bioretention, et cetera. We did also illustrate if there was a need outside the manufactured home community, additional on-street parking, whether it's angled or perpendicular parking, or is put there at all, is a conversation down the road, but it does fit, it does work, does function properly, but that doesn't mean it has to happen. But in a nutshell, think of us doubling the amount of parking available off-street at the park site itself. This is where non-residents make a payment to use the facility. This is manned by park staff, so either high school kids or college kids. There is a lot of difficulty in keeping track of who's paid, who hasn't, because residents don't pay, non-residents do pay. That's why the fencing is there, is to funnel people to the entry and to ensure that non-residents pay. There have been, anecdotally from the park staff, number of raised temperatures of some people who said they've paid or don't. They just walk through and, when someone tries to flag them down, kind of ignore them altogether. The park staff has the mandate, don't get in a conflict with anybody. It's not worth it. So part of that conversation that I had with the study was shifting away from any sort of paid facility, paid recreational facility, returning it to being an entirely free facility and requiring vehicles parking to pay. So biking up, walking up, dropping off and leaving, free, take down all the fencing to around the park, take away this little station, and then when you park your vehicle, you pay for your time there. That was a lot of conversation with the council, but it's something that they have been supportive of as they've approved the study. So that doesn't mean that we have absolutely determined what those rates will be, et cetera. But the out-of-staters that are parking on Sandy Beach and taking the tickets for the day are being charged $15, and they have no issue with that. That doesn't faze them at all. And again, the improved parking facilities, again, better pedestrian facilities to get into the site, better pedestrian facilities within the site to separate you out from residents, from vehicles. You can see, again, ample parking, drop-off area, easy to identify entries and exits, good circulation and safe circulation within the site itself. There would be a series of pay kiosks around the park area. Convenient when you're either going to or coming from your car. Again, rate structure, et cetera, has not been sorted out, but that would be the plan is when you park your vehicle, you'll pay the rest of the facilities being at the park free to everyone. There's an addition of a small maintenance facility for the park staff, for mowers, et cetera, off to the side. That white little cube structure in the front is the lift station that would have to be replaced. Again, it's located off the edge and easy to access for maintenance, but not within the middle of the site where it kind of is now. The most notable, and you can see how the discussion kind of stemmed from the boat launch itself, is the new unified lakefront itself, beachfront. Singular beachfront from one end to the other without fear of any vehicles in the middle of it. There's a pier structure there that's just as a big kind of architectural element to extend out into the water so people can enjoy that. The boat slips that you see there are the existing boat slips. They would be ADA accessible with a path system. So not exactly like that now. Trying to make the entire park more accessible to all users. The final configuration and location of the boat slips would be subject to review by the park staff and the park board itself. Some more conversation would likely happen with that. We've gotten some feedback on it. Some people certainly want to make sure there's an area to beach your boat if you're coming in when slips are full. Making sure slips are located such that it doesn't conflict with swimmers. We're not showing all the details like a defined swimming area out here. Of course, those things would be brought forward again as you have today. But again, large identified path system where someone can readily get to the water's edge. That pier we're showing in the middle, historically, Sandy Beach has always had a large element. This was a huge water slide. There had been some attendees at previous presentations that remember going down this slide. I'm amazed by that just looking at the photos. I would be remiss if I thought a parent today would let their child go down this, but it looks amazing and a little fearful simultaneously. So huge structure that people would come from miles and miles around to go and participate in at the beach. That's where the pier that you're seeing kind of projecting out into the water kind of comes from, having a large element that attracts people to being able to get out onto and over the water. There is certainly the ability to remove it. It is not a linchpin to this, but it, again, was trying to kind of pay homage to the history of Sandy Beach Park. You have some great information in the case down in the entry downstairs, in the main area downstairs. From the Historical Society about the beach itself. I certainly encourage you to go and take a couple minutes and read it and see some of the photos. But again, large unified beachfront separating out vehicles, especially boats, from the boating recreational, from the beach recreational area. Improved volleyball courts and playground area, moving them from where they are now off on the edge. They're going to get disrupted by the proposed improvements for the boat launch. There is an interim plan to locate them inside of the existing green area in the parking lot, and the volleyball organizations have been contacted about that, and they're fine with that in the interim. But putting beach volleyball on the beach, you have, with the redesign, plenty of area out there to accommodate the beach volleyball courts on the beach and still have plenty of beach space for sunbathers and families. It does retain one of the volleyball courts out in the kind of park setting area as well. They do use them all pretty regularly, so we want to make sure that we are accommodating them moving forward. But again, you can see pulling all the recreational activities together so people aren't off on, if your kids are playing volleyball, they're not off on one side of the park and you're over on the other. Improved playground. Some of the playground equipment is nearing the end of its life, and so does need to be replaced. Playground equipment, while we're showing examples here, would range for small children to tots to kind of active preteen children. The equipment, et cetera, would always be, as you normally do, evaluated by your park staff and determined by the Parks Board as to what's appropriate out there. New shelter with bathroom facilities out there, so an open-air shelter with connected bathrooms. The bathroom facilities out there are antiquated. They need to be replaced. A new structure out there is necessary as well, so you can still have some shaded, covered parking, picnicking area. Certainly could be made available for rent as you do with some of your other park facilities. You can see there's some lawn area where you can just have some open-air picnicking as well. And the same holds true on the other side of the park, where you have the existing ADA area for picnicking, and again, some other open-air picnicking areas. The boat launch, this does reflect 2A. So This was revised over the last few weeks, month and a half, with the input received at the PIMs and some of the other presentations that were made. This is a 2-launch facility. There is parking for 17 boats and cars and trailers out there, including an ADA one on the end. On each side accommodates treatment stations, wash stations for aquatic invasive species. So before you put your boat in and when you take the boat out, Patricia Cicero has been involved in determining that. The stormwater facilities here, linear bioretention facilities, before release, there is a pipe that eventually goes back out into the lake like it is now, but again, treats stormwater before it goes back into the lake, which is not necessarily the case today. We have separated out the entry exit for the boat launch from all of the other parking, so there will not be confusion between the two. They have their own entry here. What you're seeing here, which looks like a driveway, would really be a emergency access only. Generally think of a hard surface, grass covered, like grasscrete product. So emergency services, et cetera, could utilize it if necessary, but by and large, it would be cordoned off and look like grass because it's got a grass growing through the product itself. Just another angle of it, we were showing an area where people could beach themselves. We're also showing plantings that were the request of Patricia Cicero at the edges of the water, both to define space and to be functional for treatment on the water's edge. As I said, the issue with the piers and locations here, some of that may need to be tweaked as we get into the details. We're not quite there yet on that. A little more feedback may be necessary for the Parks Board to evaluate. So what's appropriate, we did hear some feedback on what's desired, what's not desired. Again, showing that all of the facilities that are out there now in the water can be retained, in essence. Showing you, this is the view now through that area with the some of the private property, and then to the right is the security fencing, because it's, again, directing you to pay to use the facilities. This would be a rendering of what they would see. Yes, they'd be looking across the boat launch, but it would be no fencing. It would be native species plantings there. And when a boat's launching, yes, that would be in the way of the view of the water, but over time, it would be different than this. Need to improve the restaurant facility, and it's something you certainly need to weigh in on and determine if you're supportive of. The existing facility, as I said, is at the end of its life. It doesn't function properly. It is failing and had failed in certain areas and was improved by the city to make it functional. Of course, it's well utilized in the summer months. A new facility out there could be used year-round, which certainly would be a nice option, especially if as you program things in the winter months. Ice fishing, you certainly get a lot of pond hockey on the green area in the parking lot, so warming, shelter, restroom facility. It'd be nice to have that out there. I don't want people to get bogged down on the architecture that we're showing here. This is just one version. It shows a restaurant with event space facility and an open-air deck, raised deck. This is a 2 to 2.5 story facility out there. As we get closer to potentially having an end user and such, as with anything in the built world, it would come to the Plan Commission for review and approval prior to any construction. So again, this is a little artistic rendering of what could happen out there, trying to show at least sort of low, flat lines to not overwhelm the space, but show a nice unifying feature in the center for food, beverage activities, a lot of outdoor seating. A lot of stormwater management being installed. So this would be between the proposed parking area and the boat launch. That's one of them. There's another one between the manufactured home community and the parking lot as well. This would be a kind of lower dry green area. Obviously, when it rains, it would function, but more often than not, it would be a dry area that you could go to throw a frisbee if you wanted to. In the winter months, again, it would be flooded and used for the pond hockey that you have out there, which is pretty well used to date. Overall, hard surface areas for driving and or parking and boat launch is an increase of about a half acre of pervious area. But again, we can offset that with the bioswales and such, added green space inside of the parking lot. Those are details that generally get sorted out as you get closer and closer to construction. We aren't at engineering level here. We did work from survey level data to put these graphics together, to put these the chosen alternative together for the council. So it does have a foot in reality. We do know it all works, but as is with anything, as you saw with the boat launch itself, as you really get into all the engineering, some things slide around here and there a bit to make sure it functions properly. Those are next step items. So as you see here, this is the schematic for the proposed boat launch. This is the one that has also been approved by the Parks Board for the grant. There is an interim, and we aren't redoing all the parking lot when we do this, so separating out the activities for the boat launching, but restriping some of the pavement area in the existing parking lot to make sure it functions until you move into rebuilding the entire parking lot. This is, if you can see it, showing that grasscrete product. Grass grows up through it for emergency access purposes. Just showing various views of the site, the grasses that have been asked for by Patricia Cicero to be added into the area around the boat launch itself. And then the manufactured home community. We have reconfigured the manufactured home community so it meets contemporary design standards for the lots themselves and future homes themselves. There's a reduction to about 85 manufactured home sites out there, improved access to all the public infrastructure, an on-site management office that has shower facilities, laundry facilities, and would function as the shelter in inclement weather, and then extension of Ferry Drive. So this is what's out there now. The infrastructure is failing. It's pretty tight, as we talked about. The layout is generally the same, but the sites are a little bit larger. The sites accommodate not only the home, but 2 off-street parking stalls per site. That is a significant improvement from what's there now, because some may have enough for one parking stall, for one vehicle to park near their home, and then yet others park along the existing roadway, which is very narrow and isn't constructed to handle that type of parking on the edges. So it starts to deteriorate. This is being redesigned to accommodate parking on individual sites, not on the access drive, even though the access drive will be widened to better afford navigation of vehicles, but also emergency services should that be necessary. This is the existing kind of resource facility out there, showing a new one centrally located between kind of the upper and lower manufactured home communities. Easy connections to the pedestrian connections over to the park itself. Again, the extension of Ferry Drive from Sandy Beach through. And then the design here works around the mounds that have been identified out there as an archaeological resource. One of the very first steps in the study was to reach out to the state to find out what is out there. They provided some documentation, but there are areas that we just aren't touching, which is where the existing mound is. I think we have a better, it shows you here's kind of the mound area, improved facilities around it, but staying away from it. Encountering archaeological resources is nothing new in construction projects for Lake Mills. What would happen is when the project is let, there would be an archaeologist on site during construction to ensure people are staying away from it. And should something be encountered on site, I looked to Steve on that, but you have that with Main Street, you had it with Pine, you had it with.
We have it with the LSL project, so every water service lateral we do, we have to have an archaeological report. We did it with the cemetery. We did it with all the electric lines we put in. So we have an extensive background with a archaeological firm out of Milwaukee. And they're used to it, but Lake Mills has been identified as an area where there was a lot of activity. And so we just anticipate that everything we do will have an archaeological for.
We did break the project study down into sections, just so it's easier to identify in the study costs associated with it, et cetera. This also started to lead to the implementation strategy. So there's phasing documentation in the study. But at the end of the day, the first thing that has to occur is the boat launch. The boat launch needs to be removed from its current location before you can move forward with anything else. You need to have an active boat launch. We all recognize that. Moving it to the edge, which is also the place that was identified a number of years ago in a previous study. This is the feedback that we had received from the council back in 2018 was this is their preferred location. The Parks Board has made that same recommendation to the council. So you can move forward with the grant application itself. The second phase would be the parking lot facilities and the underground work. So you got to tear up the parking lot to do a lot of underground work. The mobile home community reconstruction would happen simultaneous to that. So once you start doing the utility work, you're doing all of the utility work. And talking with the forester, the tree health out in the manufactured home community is low. And it is at the point where it needs to be replaced. So, yes, there would be a fair amount of clear cutting out there, but I leave the kind of details of that to Rob Getz. That's his forte. But in essence, you would be reconstructing the mobile home community and the parking facilities. So generally between what would be the new boat launch and Rotary Park all simultaneously, because got to do the underground work. Once you're doing the underground work, you got to replace all the stuff on top of it. You can't ignore one to do the other. We tried looking at it early on in the study and working with the engineers. It just doesn't work. It gets too costly to try to work around those things. You can't have new going into considerably old. You can't have half-inch or three-quarter-inch water serving things. So you don't have to immediately start touching the beachfront and the building. You still have a little bit of life left in the building, but when I say a little bit, you're talking a few years. But that's that kind of area here. So that would be kind of the third piece that you would get into. But the goal is to get the boat launch in, then move into replacing all the utilities, upgrading the manufactured home community, and then getting the parking sorted out and opening up the entire park to be a free resource to all users. So I went through things, I don't want to say quickly, but purposefully. I'm sure there are questions from the commissioners on this.
Plan commissioners and staff, we have people here who have an interest in the outcome of this whole redesign, and I would like to entertain a motion. I would say, is there anyone that would like to say something this evening? Okay, we do have one person. I would entertain a motion to suspend the rules for 5 minutes. We can always add to that to hear anyone who wishes to speak to this, since people have appeared and have an interest. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Aye. If anyone wishes to speak, then please approach the podium, sign in, and announce your name for the clerk.
My name is Marvin Barnes. I live at 214 West Lake Street in Lake Mills. Do I need to be sworn in?
Oh, no, just go ahead and give your comments.
I've attended, I think, most of the meetings since January, and during the public forums, gave some comments. My only concern still is the excessive, which will be excessive amount of boat trailer parking. And I understand from Mr. Wilkie that the DNR restricts the parking in section 1 to 16 plus 1. But on an average weekend, on a summertime, I've been a boater on Rock Lake all my life. So I'm very familiar with the lake and Sandy Beach. And if you're going to only have 16 plus 1, so let's say 17 parking spots, and you take away the boat parking on Sandy Beach Road, which I'm 100% for, because I think that's dangerous itself. The one thing as a planning commission needs to be addressed is on an average weekend, even this last weekend, which really was a slow weekend, there's an average of 30 to 50 boats and trailers at a minimum. So where are they going to go? Because you either have to say, we're only going to take 17 boats into Sandy Beach and say nothing after that, or you have to figure out where they're going to go. Will they go to Rotary Park? Allow them to use Rotary Park? If they use Rotary Park, then they actually have it paid to use your facility, because they'll launch, go up to Rotary Park, and then not pay, because they're not required to pay, because you'll have paying in those 17 spots. But if they park up in Rotary Park, they're not required to pay, so they just launch for free. If you take away Rotary Park also, then it still needs to be addressed. What is going to happen? Because you either, I mean, if you take, and I'm sure Mr. Wilkie has the history, and Rob Getz has the history of the number of boats on a weekend, and I'll guarantee you it's at least 30, 50, sometimes more. And so you only have 17. What are you going to do? You either have to say no more. It's kind of like county on the north end. The county has the amount and has a little sign to come in, make sure there's a parking spot. But if you go up on County Park on the north end, when that's full, people are parking up on Lake Park Road. They're parking all over the place. People will find a place to park and launch their boat. So I'm just saying, I'm asking you to, as a planning commission, to look at this and say, what are we going to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak about the proposal? Okay. All right, at this time, I'm going to, is there anyone else who wishes to speak about the proposal? Okay. All right. All right, and then again, go to the podium if you would, and write in your name and then announce your name and address for the record. Mm-hmm.
My name is Patrick Theater, and I'm the president of the Sandy Beach Mobile Home Association, LLC. And of course, these plans really affect the people who have purchased mobile homes in your park and paying for years and years the appropriate money that we were negotiated with as the city went along in the years. Now, I've been at the park probably 30 years. There are other people at the park longer than I have who have owned property. They don't own the property the mobile home is on, but they own the mobile home. Each and every year, we pay our fair share to the city. We support the city in all their endeavors. As a matter of fact, I think I wrote a check for $500 for the fireworks. So, we support your community. I think we're looking at some really large undertaking here. When you consider what we have given the city, and I'm not saying we're selfish in any means, over the years, we have provided the city with a lot of revenue. The city has chosen not to put that revenue in our park. They may have put it in a cemetery, they may have put it somewhere else. But our parks, especially Sandy Beach, which we pay dearly for, have not been improved. And thus, we come down to this. We come down with a study that says, all right, we need to do this, we need this structure, that structure. I just want the council to take a strong look, and I support a lot of this stuff. I support that boat launch where it should be, the safety purposes of it, that you don't have the traffic in and out with kids running around, get it at the end, you can control it more. But I urge you to take a strong look at what we're really biting off here. The park over the years didn't deteriorate the day was yesterday. It deteriorated because we didn't stick any money in it to build it up gradually, and we came out with this. When we deal with this, I just strongly urge you to deal slow and have plans available. But please give us an opportunity to present our side of the story, you might say, on what we think about the park, what we may afford. You certainly can't have people running out of here. I mean, you need the revenue. That's why we have the park. And we support that 100%. We also have an agreement with the city. And we have to strongly take a look at that. And we should be really sitting down and saying, hey, what is going to affect us? What do we have to do? How can we help? Let's put it that way. How can we help? So that's all I want to say is just that there is another entity out there, and that we're as concerned with the city and the way they're moving on just as everybody else here. And to take a deep look and to take a strong look at what people can provide in their opinions. So I thank you very much for letting me talk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fair. Is there anyone else who wants to, who has anything to say about the proposal? All right, I'm going to close public comment at this time. Then we'll go on to observations and impressions by plan commissioners. What are your impressions of the proposed plan? Oh, Mr. Wilkie, excuse me.
I did want to make some comments. We followed all the archaeological requirements of the state and the city's policies. So when you look at, I don't know if you read that one article that was shown there, but it talks about the Indian remains that were found there and that they were dug up and taken to UW Milwaukee, but that there's still some anticipation that there might be some left there. So we'll do an archaeological. We've hired Commonwealth out of Milwaukee. They'll do the archaeological for us. And then they'll continue to provide those services through any construction that we do. From an environmental standpoint, we followed all the city standards. So if there's a steep slope, we've generally stayed away from it. Trees, we've saved as many trees as we could. We improved the stormwater situation down there substantially in this proposal. We've added plantings on the shore, which is another environmental feature that's beneficial. If you just weigh the environmental impact that stormwater treatment will have on removing pollutants from coming off those parking lots will be substantial in the long-term water quality at that beach. We followed fiscal policies. So when we looked at it, we came in with multiple proposals on either using bond revenues or general obligation bond revenues or revenue bonds. And so we approached it from that point, gave them the options, gave them how it would pay out, gave them an idea of how many people use the area and those types of things. And we tried to stay consistent with the existing uses. So if you look, we have a launch, we have piers, we have playground areas, we have a restaurant. The one thing we did look at that might be a bigger feature on the restaurant would be the banquet facility, but in general, it's very, very consistent with what's existing, the volleyball, those types of things. So we followed those standards right down the line. Now, when you look at this, and you're looking at a long-term plan here, I don't care how you look at it, the phasing is long-term. At the shortest 5 years, probably longer than that in reality, changes are going to occur. Councils are going to change, their perceptions of what should be out there are going to change, the environment could change, fiscal conditions could change, technology could change. I mean, we looking at kiosks out there, maybe we just have them get an app on their phone and pay through the phone for parking. Maybe we don't need kiosks at all. Those types of things are changing on a daily basis. So while we're looking at this, the one thing that we're really focusing on is the boat launch. And when we did the boat launch, we made changes to that boat launch from the original proposal to accommodate several of the proposals. So if you look at it now, there's one entrance at the far east end. In fact, it sticks out further than what the current driveway is as far as how far west it is. And so we've looked at all the comments that we could. We've put in the additional stormwater. We've measured, DNR told us 17 boat spaces. I think that their goal is to limit the number of boats on the lake, saying that this lake is so big, this is how many boats can actually boat on there safely. And so the consideration is more along the lines of, because when we did our initial proposal and we had all those conversations, it was, well, how many boat parking spaces do you think we should have? And the DNR pretty much came down and said, you want to limit it as much as you can. And so that was the conversation, and I'm pretty sure if you're going for a grant from the DNR, they're going to look at that and say, hey, this is an expectation. And we did talk about, well, if you don't want to follow that, you can always add more, but build it on your own. So those are conditions that we've gone through. We've paid a lot of attention to the expectations that we understand the city has now, including costs. We've weighted and evaluated it and looked at how to get this done in the most effective fashion possible. So from that standpoint, yes. we could spend more money and do things differently, or we could take down a lot of trees, or but I think we followed all the expectations that we normally see when we do a project. And I think that we followed that consistently. Now, if there's other things that the council wants to see, I think that, or the plan commission wants to see, we can look at those and make proposals on those, but we followed consistently what we see as history of construction projects for the city. And we did take a lot of input. We did a study on the restaurant, banquet facility, and lodging. We threw out the lodging based on the study. We kept the restaurant and banquet facility. So we've kind of gone down this road with the ideas and the concepts of, hey, this is how we normally do things. Now, we can change that, but I think that based on history, you're going to find that it's going to be really hard to change this. And if you're going to find out all the other stakeholders that can become involved. If you move to that east side with the boat launch, I'm pretty sure that there'll be some Ho-Chunk Nation people visiting our plan commission and our city council meetings. If we start taking down trees, you're going to have people come that are going to show up and talk about trees. So you have a lot of other issues, a lot of other stakeholders, depending on how you start impacting the trailer park. At one point in time, there was conversation of trailers versus condos. And the conversation that came out of that was, well, we really bought this land for a park. The trailer park is a great holding use. Condos would not be. So that's why we continued with trailers, to be able to hold that, so that if at some point in time in the future we decide to make that whole area park, that's still available to us. And if we decide to go to condos at some point in the future, it's not that difficult to transition from the trailer park to condos either. But it's hard coming back from condos to any of the other uses. So that was, we've gone through this conversation. We've weighed and evaluated all these possibilities here, and we've put a lot of effort into it, and we think that what we've put forward is a great proposal. I think that to a certain extent, I've read the 1988 information, and I just could have handed out their memos. They were pretty similar, and that's 30-some years ago. So if you think about how much time and distance has gone and how much more wear and tear is on the place, it's important to take care of these activities now, and how we finance them can still be discussed. What ultimately ends up getting built will be discussed more in the future, because we're not building them this year. We're looking at the boat launch. And so from that standpoint, we're just trying to be as open and careful as possible, but we have examined as much as we can within the bounds of what is normal for the city.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wilkie. Plan commissioners and staff, because this was coming before us for review, I called people associated with the Joint Rock Lake Committee. I talked to Stanley Szymanski, Wes Dawson, and Patricia Cicero, and she also emailed me, and apologize for not handing this out earlier, but that can just go all the way down. And she sent comments, and I believe, yeah, he has it. And but that should keep going. From the looks of her email, it appears that that's come forward to the council already. But I want the Plan Commission to be aware of her remarks, and so then that's there for your information. And from the plan, I can see that there's been. She had talked about the native plant garden areas, and I think that she may still be in favor of seeing how much they could be increased for these native plant areas on the west side especially. And then, and she also mentioned elimination of the long promenade, which was a substantial feature. And so that was a remark of hers. And then of course, each one of these people did comment on, improving and stormwater management, which in Dustin's report, he has shown the effect of improving stormwater management and reducing stormwater runoff to Rock Lake. And we know that those efforts are there. There's also the comment about nesting turtles that cross over and they look for a place to nest. But I think in her comments she mentioned that, since this is a DNR grant proposal, that likely they would have a comment about that matter. Other than that, in looking at this from a planning perspective, I would just say that to be certain as it goes forward, of course, we understand that there'd be some adjustment over time to the parking lot design and so on, and to take due care in the parking lot design standards and the landscaping and buffer standards contained in the zoning ordinance. And for one, I would be in favor of seeing to what extent you could increase landscaping in the parking areas itself to assist with a bit more natural filtration. So I would, and I would say none of the other ones brought that up, but that's of course something I like. So there you have it. And commissioners, do you have any other, do you have comments about, and what are your impressions about the plan?
The comments on the parking there, it seems like, the 17, it seems a little skinny, but you would kind of explained you were kind of against
Yeah,
the
the
rock and a
DNR
hard
told us
place
what the
there.
numbers were going to be,
Okay.
so.
Yeah,
Okay.
choices are few
Now,
there.
It's important to note in the short run, the parking lot as you see it today, the main parking lot with the area for boat parking remains. There is not as Steve was saying, the first issue right now is just the boat launch and what has been brought forward. The remainder of the parking area this year, next year will not change at all. So it'll still be that parking.
Yeah, but the DNR kind of told you where we're going
Yeah, we could accommodate other parking in other locations. The debate has been, and what they're going to look at, and what we're focusing on as part of this process right now is the boat launch.
there. Yeah,
And
comments
the boat
go up.
launch is going to have 17. Now, in the future, if you wanted to, there was a debate internally, and we haven't fought that battle yet, because we currently have boat storage in the existing parking lot. That's not shown here. Would we keep that or not? How would we utilize that? How would we have that impact? And so let's say, we decide that we're going to put as much parking in the parking lot as possible and put no parking on Sandy Beach Road. And the first comments we start getting from the public are, we want parking on Sandy Beach Road again. How long do you think it's going to take the council to put parking on Sandy Beach Road again? I mean, these are things that, while it's nice to say this is the way it's going to be, my experience is that it's not going to be that way. And so we talked about the additional plannings, but then we argued about, well, where are we going to put the people who want to come across the lake and park their boats on the beach? Well, you can't have that all over the beach either. So how do you balance the plantings versus the boat parking, and where is it going to occur, and those types of things? And the turtles, I mean, if the DNR says we want you to accommodate the turtles, they'll tell us how we're going to do it. My initial conversations with the DNRs is they don't think they're coming from that area. They think they're coming from the other side, from the Mud Lake side, not the Sandy Beach side. So there are lots of things that that could be discussed and determined. I think once we get into those finer details, we'll figure that out. Right now, what we're looking at is, this is a concept. I think the concept incorporates all the policies of the city as it exists. As we continue to move forward, I'm sure there'll be some changes. Even in the boat launch part, I'm sure the DNR will give us some things that we'll have to work on and work through. But, you know, we did the geotech surveys. We went out and surveyed the depth of the water and the slopes of the beaches to determine where the water dropped off the fastest, because generally you want a nice slope to be able to get your trailer down and get your boat to launch off. And the area we picked was the best. So you go through, we've done as much as we can from the beginning standpoint. I'm sure that as we incorporate the DNR, we'll get more information, and as we incorporate the commission, we'll get more information, and the Fish and Wildlife will get more information, and the archaeological will get more information. And at some point in time, we'll actually have something that's in final design and ready to be built on the boat launch. But I don't want to get bogged down in all the other possibilities when we're looking at the boat launch, but you guys also, you have a statutory responsibility to look at the restaurant.
Just seem to be careful, you're trying to get 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag here, you know. Your limited resources are kind of restricted here.
The big
It
word
is a
to remember is
long-range plan. It's going to
Yes,
take
it
years to
is.
implement. But as Steve said, we were trying to make sure that we were improving the expected facilities in this park. And as Steve was saying about the restaurant, staff feels it's important to consider having a restaurant continue on site. And you know, anecdotally, it's a big draw when you're out there. But there'll be details that have to get sorted out when a restaurant plan comes forward. When we start going into the design, the actual design of parking lots.
What, question, he mentioned the fees for launching there, you got to pay those whether you
Park there or not.
drop it off or park.
Right, the boat launch area is separate, and it doesn't actually have kiosks. You pay a launch fee, and then, so if you park up the street or there, you still have to pay the launch fee, and it's still pretty much like a kiosk, though, in the fact that someone has to come through and check if you don't drop your stuff off and have it available.
In the grand scheme of things, this thing has got some revenue somewhere along the line, must be revenue neutral, I would,
Well,
long-term plan is,
we tried to make it as revenue neutral as possible. So, you know, when we evaluated the revenues that would be coming in through all the options that we have generating revenue, and then how much that would be short over the overall project, I mean, you're looking at about, what, $850,000 for the boat launch, of which we might get $475,000 in grants. So if that comes through, that's a pretty nice offset. Then we can look at, on the short-term general obligation bond, that we might refinance at some point with a revenue bond, depending on how the revenues are flowing out of the parking lots. But those are all kinds of conversations that you have to have as you continue to develop. So when we look at the restaurant, it's what kind of lease can you get? How much are we going to spend on the initial restaurant? What kind of facility is there? Is it a year round? Does it, you know, if it has banquet facilities in it? Those are all pretty big questions that start to fall into places because we're not going to, I mean, Dustin does do some of that kind of stuff, but I don't. So when I'm sitting there, I'm going to have a restaurant guy instructing us on how to set up the restaurant. And just like we do when we, build stormwater detention basins. I don't know much about it.
come to your finance decisions, we're talking 20 years, right? Financing?
Yes, all of it's likely going to be on 20 years. Now, as you know, certain features of the park aren't going to have a life of 20 years. So we go through and we evaluate each portion with the bonders, the bond advisors. And then we bond appropriately. So if the parking lot is determined to be 15 years, then we take a 15-year bond. If we, the water and sewer is 25 years or longer, then we're going to take a 19-year bond. And so we go through and do those calculations as we consider how we go through that. And of course, a GO bond is going to have, an interest rate different than a revenue bond. So that impacts it.
So in the proposition, it has the park area becoming free to use without paying to get in, that kind of thing. Do we know what the revenue was prior to on a yearly basis and what the shortfall would be by making it free?
There isn't a shortfall when you switch to paying for parking. It takes in about 30,000 a year right now. But when you go to pay for parking, because no one pays to park right now,
Yep.
It becomes a revenue stream.
Sure. Is there enforcement for that? I mean, it doesn't look like there's gates in the proposal, so.
There will there will be no fencing whatsoever on the site.
Yeah, right. I mean, like a bar or something to get in. How do you ensure that the money is being paid? I know.
For the parking?
Yeah.
Well, again, you'll either kiosk or if at the time it's decided to use some other technological feature, but usually use a kiosk and it will print out who has or hasn't paid by license plate. And then they just need to go through and scan license plates to see who hasn't paid. We will probably go, you'll pay, you'll put a ticket on your dash. If it's not current, you're gonna take it.
How would you handle the restaurant parking then?
Well, again, there are some logistic things. There are ways to provide them the opportunity to have validated parking if they spend so much at the restaurant or whatnot. So there's a number of ways. We haven't gotten into all the details of the technology side. It is something that has been discussed at length internally about that. It's all going to come down to which kind of parking mechanisms you choose. Because we are trying to stay away from having gates on the parking, and we were trying to stay away from having to man something the entire time you're there. We wanted something very automated. So there are things that can be done with the restaurant.
And this is pretty common on the beaches in Florida and Alabama and Mississippi, where you have a
Yeah.
parking lot along the ocean, and
Okay,
you
park.
pull in, you pay for it by a kiosk, and then someone goes through and checks. And also, a lot of airports are going to it. So it's a technology that's developing, and like I said, probably at some point in time, it'll just be a cell phone thing. So, I mean, it's a nice concept. We'll figure it out. We got a pretty good idea what the revenue stream would be, which would be it would be enough to pay a large portion of the revenue bond. But it wouldn't pay for all of it. But there are other revenue streams that come in there too. So
With the work on the mobile home area, the extension of the road, and it sounds like we would widen the road. You had mentioned that the lanes are very small and inadequate, so I assume you'd have to widen them. Is that going to impact any of the tenants and/or remove any of the buildings?
Well, everything would have to be removed on site when we go into construction. So there are logistics that, again, based on the current agreements, leasing agreements that are in place and the construction methodologies, but the likelihood is everything will have to get removed from the site. Construction will occur, and then whatever meets the contemporary manufactured home design building standards would be allowed to come back on. And that's a couple years down the road yet.
Does it remove any of the allocated lots? Does it reduce the amount?
Yes.
we have 105 lots now. I think 94 of them are being used.
Correct.
Some of them have trailers on them, they're not really being used. So we're looking at, what, 85?
Correct.
So, yeah, we'd probably lose 6, 7 trailers.
You're reconfiguring the lots then?
They're going to be bigger.
They're going to be bigger. They are kind of oriented a little bit differently. You can see just in the layout.
They're brought up to city standards then?
We have requirements. The city has requirements in its own zoning code for minimum size of the lots and the amount of parking that's being provided. There are state standards for the design of the facilities. And then there are state standards for the actual structure on them.
Yeah, and I know that the fire department is not crazy about being able to get in, and they're also not crazy about the fire flows within there and the amount of pine trees in there.
The current configuration, not the proposed.
Right. So if you looked at the current configuration, if you had to get in there, those pine trees start burning, and it would pretty much just be a stand to the south edge and watch.
Does the loss of allocated spots, 6 or so, or trailers that are in there now, to have a large impact on revenue then? Because I assume the city takes a portion of the,
No, because the improved facilities has higher revenue rates.
Okay.
In keeping with and the study walks through this, other similar facilities or in the general area, meaning Jefferson County, Dane County, but also other types, similar manufactured home communities with these types of amenities at their fingertips. We did both of those.
The focus tonight is really on section 1, right?
Right.
It is.
Yeah, it really is, because we're asked to review the concept option 2A, and we realize that over time, that this is a long-range plan, and over time, there are going to be adjustments, and we understand that. Right now, we're being asked about this concept design option 2A, and if we have a good comfort level with this, then I would propose that entertain a motion to recommend approval of this design concept 2A, if the plan commissioners are so inclined. You realize that it's long-term and that things will be adjusted as it goes along.
Well, if we're just looking at section 1 there, that makes a lot of logic to moving that launch thing to the west there. I mean, makes a lot of sense from my standpoint. I would approve of it.
Did you make a motion?
Sure.
Okay.
What would you like me to say?
To recommend approval of design option 2A for Sandy Beach redevelopment concept and boat launch.
Boat launch, okay. I'll make that motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend approval of Sandy Beach redevelopment concept and boat launch design option 2A.
My comment would be it's a concept.
Yeah, as a concept, realizing that,
Subject to-
even sitting here now, I have several ideas about how that could be improved, how this could be improved, but it's a long term, and this is a concept, so that's that's our focus. All right, it's been moved and seconded to recommend approval of this concept. Is there some discussion? Okay. In that case, I'll proceed with roll call vote.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Schumacher?
Aye.
Mr. Coots?
Aye.
Ms. Lazaris?
Aye.
Mr. Magnuson?
Aye.
Motion passed 5-0.
All right, we go on to item number 6, recommendations for future agendas. Looking at June, is there something coming forward at this time for the fourth Tuesday in June? Or beyond? huh?
Nothing that has surfaced now.
Okay, very
Likely
well.
in July.
All right, okay, very good. All right. As long as there's nothing else under that item, then item number 7, adjournment. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We are adjourned.